Once you have reached the stage where you yourself actually notice that you feel like you're not hearing things as well anymore, by that point, you've actually entered what's called stage 3 of hearing loss. And that's already at that point where, sorry, bud, you're too little too late. At the end of the day, if somebody wants to get a pair of loupes, or if somebody wants to invest in a certain type of PPE or whatever it might be, okay, like let them make that decision for what they feel is best for them in their practice, but make them aware that this is a big risk, and at least give them that awareness and knowledge, and then let them go run with it from there. If you spent those prior 35 years in this high noise-rich environment, the systemic effects that it had on you can still carry on with you later in life. So it's just adds that much in another dimension, that much more importance to this topic.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, an Endeavor Business Media production. This is episode number 392. I'm your host, Andrew Johnston, and thank you so much for making us a part of your day. So, I mean, listen, friends, we all make mistakes, and I think that none of our lives are very perfect, and I did kind of a big mistake, and I'm just going to fess up. I'm going to come clean about it. It was totally unintentional, but I think that's kind of how a lot of mistakes happen anyway. I mentioned last week on the intro that I did go to the ADHA conference earlier this month. And no, that's not the mistake I was talking about for all of you, the little snarky pants over there. So I went to the ADHA conference, and the purpose of it was multi-leveled, but I think one of the bigger things was I want to do some podcasting. I planned to get about 4 interviews done. I had 3 scheduled. The first one was kind of like an impromptu one, and they're all lined up, and man, it was going to be great. So I had bought some new gear because as RDH Magazine now has their own podcast, they need their own gear for the conferences, and I need my own gear for the conferences. And one of the things that I bought was really kind of cool. It didn't have nearly as many cords, and the setup was going to be a cinch compared to kind of what we had done before. If you'd ever seen us maybe outside Chicago Midwinter with all of our cords dangling everywhere on the bench, it looked just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, before I left, my wife and I just went through everything, made sure everything connected. And if there was like a bridge connection, we had all the bridge connections, making sure the power turned on, just the simple little stuff. But what I didn't do was actually advance past that welcome screen that shows up on the device that says, hey, welcome to this device. And then there's like a forward arrow. I didn't hit it. I didn't think I would need to. If it's just like my last one, I wouldn't have needed to. But that's where the mistake lies. I should have gone past that because there was a software update that I did not do. And so, of course, when I go to record with the ADHA leadership, it didn't work. And I tried connecting to the Wi-Fi at the conference to see if I can get the software to update there. Didn't work. I walked across the street to the Marriott lobby to see if I could connect there. Of course, that didn't work either. The most embarrassing thing when you're the person that's known for podcasting. I think we've done some 800 and some odd podcasts in our time, and we just couldn't get this little gear to work. So embarrassing. Anyway, so because I couldn't get it to work that day, I lost all of those episodes. Well, I didn't lose them, but I just never was able to record them. And that means I wasn't able to cobble together an episode for this week, which means that you, my forgiving friends who are always in my corner, will have to be entertained by a re-airing of an episode that I did with Dr. Joy. I believe it was early last year as my co-host. And then we together interviewed Dr. Sam Shamardi on hearing loss. Of all of the back episodes that we have, this episode seemed to me very specifically significant. And the reason is because I feel like we've seen the topic of hearing loss or tinnitus ringing in our ears come up quite a bit lately. I think it was Ann Guion. She posted a course in the Andy RDH group, maybe last month, maybe the month before. There was a hygienist, her name was Heather, that asked about hearing loss and ringing in the ears just a couple of weeks ago in the RDH rant group. There was an anonymous member that last month that posted in the Dental Nachos group about hearing protection so that they could still hear the patient, but reduce the damage from the drill and the HVE. So you can see it's a relevant topic. And I couldn't have asked for a better guest than Dr. Sam Shamardi. And to answer that last question by the anonymous member, this is exactly what he talks about. The device that he created was intended so that we could still interact with our patients, but protect our ears. Just as a foreshadowing, I think that's what they call it, like when you're looking ahead in the future. Dr. Shamardi and I have been talking a little bit this year. We definitely want to get together another episode. I think it'll be his third time coming back. He's so fantastic. So if you love this episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss his next episode. This week, we are traveling to RDH Under One Roof in Nashville. It's going to be really exciting. If I can ask a huge favor for all of you that are planning to be there, if you'll just please stop by the booths of the sponsors that you've heard on the podcast and tell them thank you for sponsoring. That simple, nothing big. We have really amazing partners that we work with. I want to be able to continue to work with them. They're the ones that help support us in the show to make sure that we're able to do this. And by extension, they're bringing you awesome guests every week that you get to learn from. So I would take it as a personal favor if you would please do that for me. I would really, seriously, really appreciate it. I will be podcasting at the booth at RDH Under One Roof during the exhibit hours, most of the time recording planned episodes. Please make sure that you do stop by, say hi, maybe take some pictures as we're recording or whatever you want to do. I know we're also going to have some games. We're going to have cornhole and stuff like that, so you can play around a little bit if you want. I think I also might have a couple of spots open for recording. So if you are someone who says, you know what, I've always wanted to reach out, be on the podcast, but maybe I'm too shy or maybe whatever, let me know. You can shoot me an email, andrew@atale2hygienist.com, or you can stop by the booth and you can let me, I think Brittany's going to be there as well, so you can let her know. We'll check it against our calendar and see if we have time for it. And if, look, it doesn't work out at the conference, then we'll do it remotely. That's no problem at all. Andrew@atale2hygienist, let us know if that's something that you're interested in, or if you have a friend that you think would be great on the show. That would be awesome also. Thank you all so much for always listening, always sharing with your friends. Be sure to protect your ears. Thank you to Dr. Joy for co-hosting, and enjoy this episode with Dr. Sam Shamardi.
A tale of two hygienists.
All right, listeners, we have a treat for you today. We actually have two voices that you're going to hear. One that I'm sure you've heard before. We have Dr. Joy Void-Holmes. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Joy.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I needed a co-host. This is a tale of two hygienists. Like, we need like some power in here to talk to Dr. Sam Shamardi,
Absolutely.
who's going to be on in just a minute. But man, you know what? You're one of my favorite people in life. Dentistry, of course, too, but in life. And so this is such an opportunity, such a treat. The thing that I'm hoping that you're going to bring to this interview, just kind of giving our listeners a heads up, you have such a beautiful perspective on the dental industry from educator's perspective, logic perspective, just like real world application, which, hey, feel free to jump in at any time, ask questions, clarifications, whatever we want to do. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say, you get me in trouble every time we're together because, I say, you're one of my favorite people as well. And then when I say you give the best hugs, who calls me and say, no,
yeah,
he does not.
Who should not be named Bogey. Yeah. Well, look, when this whole COVID thing's over, anyone wants a hug, you just let me know. We'll hug it out.
Absolutely. We're actually going to have a hug contest, raise money for something. I'm sure that you guys will kill it.
We need to. Well, look, anytime there's a competition against Bogey, I am 100% in. So,
righty.
Okay, well, let's bring in our guest. Today, everyone, we have an expert who's going to be speaking to us on dentistry's deafening silence, noise-induced hearing loss. And we have brought on Dr. Sam Shamardi. Thank you for being here, doctor.
Morning. How's everybody? Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. There's so much to get to. I know we don't have a whole lot of time to get to it, but I was reading a little bit about you. You have an interesting background, and I would love for our audience to know, like, even before dentistry, like, tell me a little bit more about like your life story. Like, who are you before we get to the hearing loss issue?
Oh boy, yeah. I don't know if 45 minutes is enough, but long story short, I've kind of bounced all over the place. I actually was born in Spain, and from there, my folks moved out to Southern California. So Southern California is home for me. It's where I grew up. and loved it out there and lived out there, did my undergrad training out there. I actually was a political science major and was kind of debating between going into that life or going into dentistry, and don't know if it was a coin flip or what ended up doing it, but went to the dental way and moved out here to the East Coast in Boston, originally back in, I guess, 2003. So it's been a bit, and I did dental school here and decided to go for perio. It was something I had interest in, and went through residency in Philadelphia for perio and finished that, and have been working as a periodontist ever since, and back in Boston for the past decade, and live out here, practice out here, and it's been quite the ride. Let's put it that way, as I'm sure it is for everybody.
Oh, doctor, we're gonna have you come back on for so many other things with perio and this and that and the other. So hopefully you'll be comfortable in that seat, because we're gonna have you back.
Well, the shift from political science to perio is what I want to talk about.
Right? I read that and I was like, this is so fascinating. Like, what? How would you make that decision?
I know it was an interesting one.
Well, okay, we're going to come back to this in a whole nother time, because we got to get into this. I want to talk about, and I was gonna try and make this like corny dad joke about, like, I was gonna ask you a thing and I'd be like, huh, like that, that whole thing that dad jokes do. But I was like, how many times do you get that, and how tired of that are you? So I'm not gonna do that to you. But I do want to like address, like,
I appreciate that.
the bigger question though, like hearing loss. So in my experience, to my knowledge, I think I've seen one dentist, 0 hygienists ever be concerned about hearing loss. And so to me, within the industry, it seems like it's not really that big of a deal. So, I mean, is there a significant thing that we're missing?
Yeah, so actually you nailed it on the head, where it's not something popular. It's not something that's talked about much, but it's actually, I would say, as significant as any other issue we could have within our field. And part of the reason why we call it dentistry's deafening silence, and why we call noise-induced hearing loss a silent killer, is exactly because of that. It's silent. It's not something that you notice. It's not something that you even know is happening to you until years go by and you hit that day where suddenly you realize you can't hear certain things anymore. And of course, by that point, you've hit that point of no return, and it's too late. And the irony of it is that for all of us as dental professionals, this should be the easiest concept to understand, because we're on the other side of that script with our patients every day. And we're having this exact same conversation with them about, we show them a radiograph and we say, yes, look at this big dark shadow, and we know you're not in pain at the moment, but this is the direction it's going to go if you don't do something about it. And of course, they don't take it seriously. And then years down the line, or months down the line, or whatever it might be, what do we see happen? They're coming in, they're calling on a weekend in emergency pain. And of course, by the time they come, they either have a big abscess or an infection or whatever it might be, and they have hit the point of no return. And now we can't do anything for that. So it's a smooth transition for me to get into this topic with the hearing loss, because it's the exact same process that's happening. It's just happening to our ears. And as dental professionals, we are literally in the eye of the storm. We are at the peak of exposure and at risk to this. And we don't know that it's happening, and we don't know that anything is wrong until we have hit that point of no return. So it's on us to take this as seriously as we would anything else.
Do you guys remember, Dr. Sam, I'm sure that you know about this thing. There is an app that was super popular about 5 or 6 years ago that would tell you your hearing age. And so there'd be different frequencies that it would send out. Dr. Joy, you're looking at me like I'm crazy. Have you heard about that one?
No, I have heard. I didn't want to know my hearing age. I listen to my music extremely loud. So I'm sure there's a little bit of damage there already. And I know that it's different frequencies, but no, I didn't want to know.
So I guess here's my question. So that was all the rage. That was really popular, right? And that faded very fast. But outside of that, like, how can someone tell if their hearing is going, other than someone telling them that, hey, by the way, I noticed this about you? But that's a slow burn too.
Yeah. So what's interesting about it is that, there's different stages of hearing loss. And what you'll find if you look into it is that once you have reached the stage where you yourself actually notice that you feel like you're not hearing things as well anymore, by that point, you've actually entered what's called stage 3 of hearing loss. And that's already at that point where, sorry, bud, you're too little too late. So just to go back a step to answer your original question in terms of when would you know, the fact of the matter is you really wouldn't know unless you were very diligent to go, once a year and get an actual hearing test done. So easy enough. We go to our conferences, and if you actually pay attention in the vendor area, usually in the back corner, they've got, some little mobile unit or mobile bus or something that actually can do some hearing testing for you. But of course, it's not really spoken much about. But if you were to go and get your hearing tested, not even in stage one, you still would have no clue whatsoever. But by stage 2, even though you yourself won't notice that you have any change in your hearing, a hearing test would actually be able to tell you, hey, guess what? You've actually started to lose some of your high frequency hearing. And this is, you're already on the path. But of course, we'll be honest with ourselves and to the audience here. How many of us think about going, every year and getting a hearing test on top of everything else? None of us. And that's exactly why it's something that we don't pay attention to. And then, like I said, once you reach that point where you do begin to notice, hey, I feel like I can't hear things that I'm constantly having people, repeat or asking them to speak louder because I can't hear that voice. You've already actually hit that stage 3. And now you're at the point where your high frequency hearing is gone. And now you've started to lose the low frequency hearing as well, which is when you're starting to realize something is wrong. And of course, by then, you're at that point of no return. And that's exactly what we're trying to help people avoid.
Can we talk about the process? Like, let's talk about what's happening in our offices. What are the things that are contributing to this problem? What frequency, what duration, all of this, kind of the science behind what's happening to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is kind of the meat of everything. So what we're blessed as dental professionals is we work in an environment where we are just bombarded all day with these, noises that put us at risk. So people really stress about what's the actual specific number. And just to kind of give an overview in terms of hearing loss as a whole, the number you want to keep in mind is is 85 decibels. And to give everybody an idea of, what's 85 decibels like? And the best kind of example I can give is if somebody is standing within 3 feet of you and you're just having a conversation, and either you have to raise your voice or that person has to lean in order to be able to hear you because the environment around you is really loud. So you're sitting with your friend at a coffee shop, they're sitting right next to you, 3 feet, and you got to raise your voice in order for them to hear you. That environment will give you a hint of what 85 decibels is. So when you are in that environment and above, you are now in a state of, being in an environment that can damage your hearing. But there's another thing that goes with it. So there's 2 things that go hand in hand. Number 1 is how loud is the environment that you're in? And number 2 is how long are you in that environment? And so this is where, as dental professionals, we hit the double whammy, because not only is our environment with the actual instrumentation, the ultrasonics, all of the high speed, the suctions, the lab instruments, basically everything in our environment. And, we've got literally endless decades of literature that I could, share with everybody on this, that basically shows that the equipment that we work with and the environment that we are in consistently is well above that 85 number. In fact, I'll show you some of the numbers on that'll pretty much scare everybody that is listening in. But then you have to put in that second factor that the average dental professional's career is roughly 35 years. And we are doing, and on average, if you look at an 8 to 5, 9 to 5 day, we are in that environment for a prolonged period of time. So it's kind of like everything else. It's not about, did you have one drink or one cigarette one day, or did you maybe have one pack or too much to drink one day? It's the fact that if you're doing that, even in small increments, if you're doing it consistently and long enough over a long enough period of time, you can have the same damaging effect. So, you can have a firecracker go off right next to your ear and you can lose your hearing instantly. Or you can have somebody coming and just speaking in a loud voice that wouldn't damage your ear in a day, a week, or a month, or a year. But if somebody is doing that consistently over a long enough period of time, you're still going to end up in the same end game by losing your hearing. So again, for us as dental professionals, it's the combination of we already are in that environment where the equipment that we use is well above the limit of what causes hearing damage. And then the second part is we are in that environment for a very long period of time. So the math simply works against us. And then the last point I just have to make is what adds on to that is that's what we're doing when we're at work. But think about what we're doing when we're out of work. So Dr. Joy just mentioned, how she likes to listen to her music loud. Well, so do I. When we go to the gym, we put in our iPods and we rack up the music so we can motivate ourselves to run harder or work out better. When we go to a sporting event, when we go to a busy cafe or a bar at night. For the young audience listening that goes, maybe not during COVID, but you can sure bet once COVID ends, everyone's going to be going out to their favorite bar or club to listen to music and, enjoy their night out, to go to a concert, whatever it might be, or even riding the subway. The subway levels are deafening, the whistling that's coming from the subway. So if you think about what we do within our 9-to-5 day, we are already putting ourselves at the highest risk. But then if you start factoring in what we're actually doing on our free time, we're just adding on top of it because, again, hearing loss is a problem that never sleeps. So you start putting the math together and suddenly this picture starts to get painted where you start realizing, well, wait a second, this makes sense why we're such at risk. And this is why if you start actually asking around at some of our, colleagues who've been working for a longer time, you'll actually start to realize in having these conversations that they'll very readily be like, oh, sure, I can't hear out of this ear very well. Or yeah, I've lost 50% of my hearing. It's just that people haven't put two and two together. They think it's just, hey, I'm aging, so my hair starts to get gray. But they don't realize when it comes to this, it's something that's completely preventable.
Interesting. Earlier I used a term that I think was incorrect. I said frequency. Does frequency, so you think about like in the operatory, all of the really, really loud ones, not like the hum of the ultrasonic, and ultrasonic, I mean like the ultrasonic bath, but every really loud noise I can think of, the tongue getting sucked up with the high volume evac, all of our hand pieces, all of them are really high frequency. Does frequency play a part in this at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you nailed it on the head. So it's a combination of decibel and frequency. So those high frequency sounds, like you just mentioned, that suction high speed getting stuck on the tongue. And, you can see it holding on there and just making that noise and we're going crazy. All of that is contributing to it as well. So you think about the high speed, handpiece and the ultrasonics, speaking about hygiene, talk about tip of the spear. All of those ultrasonic instrumentations are all very high in frequency. And it's that high frequency as well that is, contributing directly to this issue.
Do you know if it's like high frequency negates high frequency as far as hearing loss, and then continuous low frequency negates later on down the road low frequency hearing loss, or does it not necessarily work that way?
It doesn't necessarily work that way. And of course, I won't speak as a professional audiologist, but from everything, of course, that I've learned about this, over this period and working with the audiologist, I can tell you that it's not that the lower sounds will necessarily create the hearing loss. It's that those higher decibel and higher frequency sounds will create the hearing damage. And what basically happens is when you go through that process of hearing loss, it starts with the high frequency, because if you think about what a high frequency sound is, those are the sounds that your ear really has to work harder in order to translate to your central nervous system for you to be able to hear. So that's what tends to be affected first. And then you go down from that area. Once you lose that high frequency, you work your way down into losing that low frequency. Because, for example, our conversation right now, it wouldn't be considered a high frequency sound that we have to, our ears, if they're healthy, have to work very hard for. But if there is a very, specific sound at a further distance, our ears working harder for that. That will lose right off the bat. But this, smaller natural conversation is the last thing that will go. And it's part of that process of starting from, the furthest away and those higher frequencies and working its way down.
I guess this is the one thing that really, really frustrates me about dentistry. And you talked earlier about how there have been decades of studies. And we know that the ADA has issued a statement as way back as 1950 about the effects of hearing loss. Why haven't we caught on, in your opinion? Because the science is there. It's everything we do is supposed to be evidence-based. So why is it not, important, if you will?
I share your frustration, believe me, and this is kind of going back to the political science background where I go nuts as well, because this is something that's bothered me to the highest degree. So actually, it's funny, when I started getting interested in this topic, it was really just because I started practicing full time. And of course, I started realizing every day, I'm not seeing 2 or 3 patients like you are in residency. Now you're seeing 10, 12, 15 a day. And suddenly I started realizing like, hey, this environment is actually aggravating. And so sure enough, like you said, my first step was to say, well, how come the ADA hasn't ever said anything? I've never heard a single thing about it. I've never read a single thing about it. I've never seen an advertisement or recommendation. So, me being, Mr. Mighty here, I'm thinking, well, let's blame the ADA because they've never said anything about it. And then just like you said, I went back and found literature from the 50s, from the 70s. But there's 2 problems. It's obviously we see that they have, in fact, mentioned it, but they haven't really made any effort to enforce it, to market it, and to really push it and make it a big deal. And that's the part that frustrates me and that I frankly don't understand. I mean, if we want to talk about, the newest composite that's going to come out in 6 months, even though there's been about, 5,000 of them already, everybody lines up like it's the newest pair of Nikes that's coming out. But, we want to talk about something that's literally affecting one of our 5 senses. And it's just like, well, the interest isn't there. So I don't know if it's because it's not a popular enough topic or what, but the ADA, I mean, I feel the same way. I feel like they really haven't done a good job of doing it. And there's a study that they had actually worked on in regards to my product that I know we'll get to. And they did a 2-year study on it and, came out with an entire professional product review. And after that, I actually followed up with them and again asked them the same question. I said, you guys have been mentioning this for a long time. Now you've just done another, product review. Why is it that we can't, as a dental organization, why can't you guys push this as being something that needs to be addressed, to become a standard of care, just like dental loops have? I said, loops aren't helping us. Loops aren't preventing us from going blind. It's not one of our 5 senses. It's helping us do our job better. And I use them, religiously. But this hearing issue is one of our 5 senses. This is far more significant. Can't you guys just come out with all the literature you've done for decades anyways and say, hey, this needs to be taken more seriously and this has to become a standard? And literally they did not reply back to that email. They basically just let that one off.
Really?
So I can't answer it. Yep. They just let that slide.
That doesn't surprise me a little bit, though. On one hand, it doesn't surprise
exactly.
me. But I mean, that would be, though, like you mentioned, though, with loops, I think with all of our educational facilities, we usually have a rep come in. They talk about the product. They talk about the things. They don't usually have like composite reps come in, but I mean, because that's a dozen. But for something like this, I would think that even the ADA or outside the ADA, whoever, like the educational institutions should really step up and say, hey, even if it's just for protecting their own butt, be like, hey, I don't want someone to have hearing loss on my shift. Let's educate about this.
Absolutely. That'd be the easiest thing. And I think, not that I can speak for them by any means, nor would I want to, but I think their way of responding back is to say, hey, there's a pamphlet, you can look online and there's literature if you look it up yourself. And hey, if you go to a conference, some of these places have hearing tests. So, it seems like they're really just putting it on us and saying, this is for you to go look into yourself. But even that being said, why don't you, really let us know and make us more aware and tell us this is something we should look into. At the end of the day, if somebody wants to get a pair of loops or if somebody wants to invest in a certain type of PPE or whatever it might be, okay, like let them make that decision for what they feel is best for them in their practice, but make them aware that this is a big risk. and at least, give them that awareness and knowledge, and then let them go run with it from there. But they're not even doing that initial step, is where, Dr. Joy and I were both talking about the same type of frustration.
So for education, and Andrew, I'm glad that you talked about the schools, because I think this is really, really important. I agree that it should start with the schools, right? And I know for a fact that my students are required to get a hearing test prior to them entering the program. Now, I guess to you, doctor, is there a specific, I guess this would be a way for us to track your hearing loss. I've never required students to get a hearing test once they leave the program, but I'm wondering, is there a way to to gauge, what the pattern of hearing loss maybe be with what it would be within schools if we're requiring one beforehand and afterhand, and then possibly bringing the reps in to kind of say, this is important. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great point that, the schools is where this issue actually starts. And actually in the lectures that I give on this topic, when I go into the evidence-based section with the literature, I spend a good part of that first, part of the lecture talking specifically about the literature that's been done at dental institutions. And what you actually find is two different things. One, to answer your question, there was actually a study done here at my old alma mater at the dental school with the director of medicine, who tested the hearing abilities of their incoming first year class. And they took the exact same students when they came back from their first year of dental school. They came back from summer to start year 2. They tested those exact same students again, and they actually found a dramatic drop in their hearing levels.
Oh.
Between year 1 and year 2. And at first, of course, we think, well, wow, like how could that be so extreme? But then again, if we take a step back and we think, okay, wait, in this particular institution at that time, there was 150 people per class. And for the first time, essentially ever, they are exposed to these sounds that they've never been exposed to. And suddenly they're sitting in a lab, 150 people in a room, hours a day over the course of the year, starting to do drilling and doing suctioning, et cetera. So actually, if you think about it in those terms, you realize, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So I think it's great that you mentioned you even have had them, look into a hearing test. And I think you would be pretty shocked to see if you were to, maybe test some of the students that are graduating and compare to that baseline of, what they had when they came in. I think you'd find some pretty interesting results from that. And then I just, second thing I would point out is, other articles that I really make an emphasis of pointing out and talking about in the lectures have been done at dental institutions. And I think those are important to talk about because, at a dental school, we got a lot of different types of, materials and companies that have their products at our school. Whereas, usually in more of a practice setting, there's usually one group or two groups that people, work with more closely and have all their products. But some of these articles have actually gone to dental schools and they've tested not just people's hearing, but just as importantly, they've actually tested the equipment that they're using at these dental institutions. What company of, ultrasonics are they using? What high-speed brands are they using? And what they've actually done is they've tested those sounds in the dental environment at the dental institutions. And what they found is that these high-speed handpieces that, you might look on a company's website and it'll say, oh, our high-speed, high-decibel range is within, this more conservative and safer number. Well, this professional audiologist in one of the articles went and tested at one of the dental school universities, and that same handpiece, those numbers were through the roof.
Really?
And wow. If you start looking at the dental standards of how long you could be exposed to those sounds before you start developing, permanent hearing damage, those numbers are really scary. So the proof is to the pudding. And when you look at the actual numbers, it tells a whole different story.
Wow. I have so much I want to talk about. Oh my gosh. By the way, just as a side note to all of this, I just put 2 and 2 together with PPE and like hearing devices, like aids for this thing. I didn't even.
Absolutely.
That's not PPE is a gown, something not to get spit on my face. Like that's PPE. Like this is that. So that was, by the way, a light bulb moment that I didn't want anyone else to gloss over, even though I glossed over it the first couple of times. I think you all said it, but, Dr. Shamardi, you said earlier, when you got into practice, you realized after not very long how aggravating the environment, the sound and all that was. My guess is high stress and other kind of more systemic things are manifesting in people. What can you tell us more about that? Because I feel like there's a whole slew of things that we're not even looking at.
That is a great point to bring up. And it's actually very scary because we're right now, of course, we're focusing on what the hearing damage does to our ears and our sense of sound, which is already debilitating. Like we're talking about, we lose one of our 5 senses and it has all this damage. Yet then when I started looking into this topic a lot more and looking into the literature more, we see an entire different side to this, that you've got what happens to our hearing, but then there's this whole what happens to our systemic health. And I was shocked to find that hearing loss and hearing damage and being exposed to these high frequency sounds actually has a lot of significant systemic health effects to us, including, not exclusively, but including high risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular death, low preterm, birth weight in terms of, mothers that are, going to be having kids and having them more prematurely. And there is endless literature on this as well. And at first, when I heard that, I'm thinking, how does this even make sense? And once you actually look at the cascade, you realize, just like you said, you have this aggravation. So now you're working 8 hours in the day, the high speed or the Cavitron, the ultrasonics, everything is loud, the piezo, whatever it may be. That suction keeps catching that patient's tongue. And you're getting worked up because you're already stressed. You're running behind. The AC is not good in the building, whatever it might be. But if you start thinking about it, stress itself, as we know, stress is not good for us anyways, right? In a small dose, fine, but consistent stress over time, we all know affects our health. So now we're in this environment that's stressing us out, and what specifically on top of the aggravation of the procedures is working us up, the actual noise is adding to our stress. And what ends up happening on this cascade is, as you start getting stressed out and as you have this level of annoyance, not only is it creating endocrine disruption within our systems, but you have that long-term type of endocrine disruption within your system. And there's a direct link between that and what ends up happening over time to heart disease. You start getting increased stress and annoyance. What is that doing to your blood pressure? That is now increasing your blood pressure. If you think about getting aggravated and stressed out, just the thought of it will get your blood pressure, get your heart pumping more. So what do we know already through medicine is, if we have a chronic level of, hypertension that we're carrying with us over a long period of time, of course, that also leads to heart disease. So there's all of those factors. And then, to think about noise in a different way, let's take a step away from the dental environment and let's just think about trying to sleep. So think about trying to sleep. And of course, sleep medicine is now becoming a huge part of dentistry as well. But let's just think about at night, you want to go to bed and you've had a long day, you're exhausted. And, every time you want to try and sleep, you maybe live in a big city and outside, there's constantly, the fire truck is going by or the ambulance is going by, or there's rowdy people in the street on a Friday night at the end of the week, and they're on the street and they're yelling.
That's
loud.
Dr. Joy, by the way, doing all that, everyone.
It might be. So if you think about it, if you're not able to get a good night of sleep, now your decreased sleep quality and your decreased sleep quantity, if that happens over a consistent basis, this is why everybody emphasizes getting a good night's rest, because what studies have found is that if you actually aren't sleeping well, not only is your learning and productivity reduced, which isn't good for you, but there's direct links on, poor sleep and hypertension and endocrine disruption over the long term, which then those all lead to those same end games. So noise is now playing a factor, not just in what it's doing to our ears, but it's also playing a direct factor in what is also contributing to our overall, health. And so what you'll find in the literature is that, people that are exposed to these high levels of sound, and what's interesting is that a couple of the articles that I found talk about people that were in careers where they were exposed to a prolonged duration of noise exposure of 35 years plus. That was their barrier. And of course, what's the average dental career? 35 years. And they found direct links to increased cardiovascular death, and that they quoted that moderate or severe noise-induced hearing loss were also associated with increased cardiovascular death. So it's not even having severe, noise-induced hearing loss, but even the moderate effects made a difference. And what they also found was that the chronic effects of being exposed to these noises carry with you even after retirement. So even if you used to smoke 2 packs a day and you quit, of course, that puts you in a much better position. But the effects of that time that you used to smoke 2 packs a day can still carry with you and affect you later in life. And they're finding this exact same issue with noise exposure. Even if you were to quit and go live in a closet the rest of your life, if you spent those prior 35 years in this high noise-rich environment, the systemic effects that it had on you can still carry on with you later in life. So it's just adds that much in another dimension, that much more importance to this topic.
I have a quick question for you, and this probably plays into your product. So I really never paid attention to decibels actually until I had to purchase a dishwasher. And I know growing up, like my dishwasher was really, really loud. And so without even knowing that I was talking about decibels, I'm like, I want a dishwasher that doesn't make noise. And so then all of the sales people started talking to me about decibels. Now, mind you, I don't hear my dishwasher anymore. So in your professional opinion, what frequency levels and what decibels should we be looking for in a product? Because now everybody's going to go back to their office because you've done such a wonderful job explaining the importance of hearing loss. So you said in particular, there are companies that are saying their high-speed handpiece is at this level, but then they were found to be off the charts. So what should we be looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it'll help segue into why I went the direction that I did. So really the gold standard number that people need to have their heads up for is 85 decibels. So any noise that is 85 decibels or above is what can actually cause and create hearing damage. Now, of course, that is also associated to the time that you're exposed to that. But, 85 is your gold standard number that you want to look at. So if you happen to be in an environment, or if your instruments or whatever it might be are 80 decibels, you could be listening to that sound 24 hours straight and you're still safe. So then we don't have to stress about it. So it's the 85 or above that we have to worry about. But to answer your second part, and this is where things get complicated in terms of, well, what should we look for in our offices? And, let's test them and let's see what it is. The problem, unfortunately, for us as dental professionals is that pretty much everything we have in our office is at or above 85. Actually, what I did one day at work is I thought, well, let me see what's going on in one of the offices I'm working at. So I literally popped in the chair, opened up my decibel app, and, had the classmate of mine who I was working with and the assistant start working using their high speed, using their suction, same standard equipment they always used. And our environment was 96. And if you look at the noise standard for NIOSH, which is the gold standard of, hearing, that 96 decibel environment that we were exposed to, according to that standard, we could only be exposed to that sound between 30 to 45 minutes cumulatively per day before we have reached that saturation level of getting hearing damage. So it goes back to this other point where a lot of times, and I would argue the same thing, we say, all right, well, I'm at the office for 8 hours a day, but I'm not drilling and using the Cavitron or piezo for 8 hours. So what's the big deal? I may be only doing this for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours cumulatively per day. And that is true. However, if you start looking at the noises that we're exposed to, and then you start looking at, how long, and you start adding those numbers up, we still are well within that range. We're still at that point where even if we're only exposed 2 hours, the decibels that we're exposed to for that time are already putting us into that danger zone of hearing damage.
Wow.
So that is pretty scary. And so that kind of made me transition and say, okay, I can't go and, prevent these sounds from being what they are. So let me try and then go a different direction and see, well, what can I find? What can I help bring to our profession that will instead allow those sounds are there? I can't change that, but maybe I can do something to protect myself. So those sounds then won't affect me in that way and won't damage my hearing.
Now, I've seen the doctors use different things in the past, and I feel like when I'm looking into like your device versus other things, there is a very much difference between shoving some cotton in your ear, which is what one of my doctors did, and just like dampening all sound across the board versus kind of, from what I understand, your device has like selective. You know what? I'm going to stop talking. Will you explain to me a little bit more about the difference between, I think, like sound dampening versus a device that still allows you to hear your patients?
Right. And this is where it gets fun because, like you said, first of all, we get a little bit of a pass as dental professionals because, frankly, this technology simply just didn't exist before. So, even though we probably wouldn't have looked into it because, again, we didn't know about it, the ADA didn't tell us about it. The fact is, not too long ago, if we actually were more aware of this and looked into it more, we didn't really have much options. So when you think about it, our first thought is the classic earplug. And why is an earplug not been utilized? We've had earplugs for as long as we could remember. So why don't we use those from day one? And of course, the reason we've never incorporated those is because they completely cut us off. They muffle all the noises. We can't communicate clearly with our patients. We can't hear our staff. And without communication, if you think about dentistry, I mean, that's part of what dentistry is all about, is the communication aspect as well. So that already has cut us off. And I would argue that that's one reason from day one that we've never really done much to protect our hearing, because the options that we had from day one weren't practical. Then with time, there were improvements, and there are devices that these are going to be the ones that everybody is familiar with who's looked into ear protection and ear molds. It's called passive hearing protection. And what a passive hearing protection product basically has in it is a filter. And depending on what specific product that you get, there are varying strengths of filters. So you may get a plug that has a filter of 10 decibels. In other words, it will filter noises 10 decibels lower. You might get one that is 15. You might get one that has 20. And what's good about these products is that, just like we said, you can take a high decibel noise and filter and lower that sound based on the strength of that filter. The problem with those passive hearing protection products is that you still have muffling of sounds. You still don't hear things clearly, and the filter can't discern and can't differentiate between which sound is actually causing you hearing damage and hearing loss, and which sound is actually completely safe and doing you no harm. And if you are in an ideal position, you don't need and want to lower a sound that is completely normal, healthy, and doesn't do you damage. You really want to put your energy and focus on lowering the sounds that are causing the hearing loss. But a passive product does not have that ability. So that is where we go then to the high level, to the next step. And this is where, my product came in and how I went into developing this. And this is a whole different technology called active hearing protection. And the difference between active and passive is that within an active hearing protection product, you actually have a circuit within that plug. So think of it essentially as like a smart plug. So there are actually, really tiny, microphone sensors, a circuit in there. And basically what this technology is able to do, it is actually able to discern those noises that are coming in. So, wearing my product, what will happen is our conversation right now, again, is considered to be healthy, safe, and doesn't cause hearing damage. So if you think about it, if you have an earplug, it doesn't matter what kind of an earplug it is, if you put a plug in your ear, you're going to have muffling. So even my noise, my conversation with you is going to sound muffled, and I'm going to have to speak louder. With this active hearing product in your ear, you have a sealed earplug in your ear. You will actually be able to hear everything the exact same as you would as if you had nothing in your ear. So you can hear everything 100% HD, which that by itself is already, to me, as a, not a big tech person, that's already a miracle. How could I have my ears sealed with a plug, but I can hear a conversation the same as if I had it on or if I had it off? So all the healthy noises are allowed to pass through completely untouched and unaffected. But then it goes the next step higher, where that circuitry is actually able to instantaneously identify, isolate, and then lower the sound of anything that is in the decibel or frequency range, which will actually cause the hearing damage. So it's important to note that it's about lowering, or the audiology terminology is compressing that sound. It's not about canceling. So we think about now noise cancellation, and that's super popular. But of course, if we were to wear a Bose noise canceling, headphone at work, again, we've now completely cut us off from our patient, from the communication. And of course, that's not practical. But what this is able to do, imagine you're in your car, imagine you turn your car on and you forgot that last night when you came home, you were blasting the music, and you turn your car on first thing in the morning and suddenly that radio blasts on and you're like, holy cow. And your first reaction, of course, there you go, Dr. Joy's like, yep, that's me. So imagine that blasting radio sound, and imagine getting that volume button and literally just turning the volume down. And that's kind of what this plug is doing. So it's not that you will no longer hear the piezo. It's not that you will no longer hear the high-speed handpiece. We want you to hear that. I want you to hear that. As a dental professional, I need to hear that I'm actually still doing the work. I just don't want it to make me deaf.
Right.
So what this is able to do is that it's able to take that noise, and that noise only, because that's what's causing the hearing damage, and lower it. So I can get a high-speed handpiece and put it right up to my ear. And all I'm going to say to myself is, oh, the high-speed handpiece is on. No big deal. It's there. And I can leave it there all day long, and nothing's going to happen, because that circuitry has lowered that sound below that 85 decibel range. So I am out of that danger zone. And that's kind of how that technology works. And what's interesting is that when I've demoed this at conferences, we do this all the time, is that we will put the product on and we'll run a high-speed handpiece near somebody's ear. And the first thing they'll say is, well, yeah, I can hear it. And I say, good. I'm happy you can hear it. I want you to hear it. And I go, oh, well, do me a favor now. Take the plug out. And they take the plug out, and we start running the high-speed handpiece again. And first thing you see happen is that instinctive jump out of the way, because suddenly they get that high shriek and shrill, and they jump out of the way and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like they naturally want to escape from that. And that's suddenly when they realize, holy cow, that's how instantaneously they notice this change. And they don't even realize that there was such a different, such a substantial difference.
Such a cool technology. Holy moly.
It really is. You talk about passive hearing protection and active hearing protection, and your device is active hearing protection. Are there other active hearing protection devices on the market, and how does your product compare to that?
So when my product first came out, we were it. So there weren't any other dental-based active hearing protection products on the market. There really weren't many passive ones either. It's just that people would try and get a musician earplug and just get a mold. So in the dental industry, we've been it. There is a product that has come out not too long ago that isn't actually designed for the dental environment, but they have, tried to market more towards dentists, which, hey, why not? The more options we have for protection, the better. And it does use active technology, but the way it actually uses it is not the same as ours. And it not only is over attenuating, in other words, it's reducing the sounds too much, which you can do, but it also is still not doing what our product is in terms of allowing the safe sounds to pass completely unaffected. So again, with us, all of the natural sounds and hearing. So I'm wearing my plugs all day at work, and I'm singing along with whatever's playing on the radio. I'm talking with my patients as if nothing's going on, because that noise is still completely unaffected. So that still is something that, again, there isn't anything in the dental market that's doing this. And we've been it. The only, the tough part, of course, is making people aware that this is even an issue, which is hats off to you guys for doing your part to trying to get the word out. And then not only educating people on what the problem is, but then letting them know, hey, there is a solution out there that you can look into. And, at the end of the day, obviously, I would love for people to look into and try my product. But, even at the lectures I'm at, I tell people, hey, even if at the end of the day, you just put foam in your ears for, 10 minutes of the worst part of your procedure, hey, you're already light years ahead of where we've been prior to this. So, doing something, of course, is better than nothing, but there certainly is a significant jump with what our technology can do.
So Dr. Shamardi, if people wanted to find out more about your product, maybe find out more about you, where you're going to be speaking next, things like that, how can they find all that?
Yeah, so a couple of options. As far as the product goes, so I'm partnered with a company called Forward Science. They're great. They're based out of Texas. A lot of offices and clinicians will be aware of them because they've been huge in the oral ID, oral diagnosis. Exactly. So you've heard of them as well. So they're a great company, and this kind of fits within their overall kind of treatment of of the body and of disease and of hearing. And so they're carrying the product right now and would be able to, help out and get the product out to people to try and purchase and do all that fun stuff. So, on my end, yeah, I still, I do like to lecture. I'm involved with a lot of, perio based lectures, over the course of the year at some of the different dental conferences. I've kind of jumped into another realm of trying to address another issue that's been kind of ignored. That's, as you can tell, kind of a passion of mine. And I recently published a book for the dental industry during the quarantine. That was my quarantine project that actually deals with financial survival. So another issue for us, of course, is we go through dental school and we go through hygiene school, and we come out, but we know how to do dentistry, we know how to do hygiene, but we know nothing about the actual business of dentistry. And meanwhile, we've got significant loans, and if you talk to business owners and you talk to individual clinicians, and probably 80% of the headache is trying to understand how to set up their life. What do they do about their loans, their student loans, taxes, savings, all this stuff. And we learn nothing about this. So that's kind of the newest project I've gone after and published a book on that, hoping to get word out to new grads and new people out there. So starting to try and lecture a little bit about that. So there's a website if people want to look up. It's www.fsg4dentists.com, and that actually stands for Financial Survival Guide for Dentists, which is the name of the book that I had published. So people can find some info on that, and hopefully, the goal at the end of the day, try and help people out, educate everybody on things that are important and things that we should frankly know more about but don't. So I'm trying to at least do my part and see if we can't get the ADA's attention and have them, start to finally emphasize something that has really caused us quite a bit of headache.
For sure. And everyone will have all that information in the show notes, so you can just click through on the links. Dr. Shamardi, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. We're going to have you back, though. This has been awesome.
Absolutely. This has been phenomenal.
And thanks, Dr. Joy, for jumping in.
No problem. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Dr. Shamardi.
Thank you both. It was awesome. I'd love to come back any other time. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.